14. Malawi, please. Malawi. I'm sorry, Malawi. Please pardon me. I wouldn't know why Rwanda came to my lips. I don't know. She was Malawi's first female president and Africa's second, as earlier said. She's a champion for the rights of women, children, the disabled, and other marginalized groups. Before becoming president of Malawi, Dr. Banda served as a member of parliament, Minister of Gender and Child Welfare, and Foreign Minister and Vice President of that republic. A recipient of more than 15 international accolades, including the Hunger Project Africa Prize for Leadership for the Sustainable End of Hunger, shared with President Joaquim Chissano of Mozambique in 1997. President Banda is a strong advocate for women and girls' emancipation and empowerment, and a prominent civil rights campaigner. She founded the Joyce Banda Foundation International, which guides projects that range from empowering women to providing for orphans of education. On the international scene, President Banda was instrumental in the formation of such organizations as the African Federation of Women Entrepreneurs, AFWE, currently running in 41 countries in Africa, the Council for the Economic Empowerment of Women in Africa, CEEWA, and the American and African Business Women's Alliance, AABWA, of which he served as first president. President Joyce Banda recently joined the Center for Global Development as a distinguished visiting fellow and is currently a visiting fellow at the Wilson Center in the United States. She's a board member of several developmental organizations, including the Executive Advisory Committee of UNIFEM, the Global Leaders Council for Reproductive Health, and the Scientific Advisory Board for the Program in Global Health and Social Change at Harvard Medical School, United States. Distinguished guests, the Chancellor, sir, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the keynote speech, which is titled "The Challenge of Leadership, Driving Africa's Future," is to be presented by no other person than our amiable, very distinguished, first female president of Malawi, and indeed the second female president of the African continent. It is my honor to invite to the podium Her Excellency, Professor Joyce Banda of the Republic of Malawi. Please let us rise as we receive the keynote speaker. And let's put our hands together while we appreciate, for those of us who are feminists and who believe in women empowerment, let us appreciate this woman of substance that is an inspiration to women and indeed the entire African continent. Thank you.
Your Excellency, Dr. Oyedepo, the Chancellor of you may be seated. The Chancellor of the Covenant University, and Professor A.A. Ataero, Vice Chancellor of Covenant University, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the keynote speech was already presented by my sister, Cecilia. Just get prepared to listen to stories of a grandmother. It is my honor and privilege to deliver a keynote address during this fourth series of the Covenant International Conference on African Development Issues here at Covenant University. I'm made to understand that the Covenant Conference aims to address strategic concerns of vital relevance to Africa's development while interrogating issues of advancement, leadership, and governance on the African continent. I'm proud to be associated with the Covenant University, a private university, one of Africa's leading universities, founded on a Christian mission ethos, and is committed to pioneering excellence at the cutting edge of learning. I have noted that the university is driven by the compelling vision of raising a new generation of leaders for the African continent on the platform of a holistic, human development-centered and integrated learning curriculum, with a visionary quest for raising total men and women who will go out to develop their world. Furthermore, I also understand that the African Leadership Development Center, a center in Covenant University, is the host platform for this conference. The center is an initiative and brainchild of the Chancellor, with a vision to raise a new generation leaders via leadership development and the nurturing of transformational leaders for the nation states of Africa and the world at large. The center is endowed by the David Oyedepo Foundation, headed by Dr. Oyedepo himself. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I have been on this street before. I came in 2015 for the opening of the Obasanjo Presidential Library. And we got here, and we were stuck in the traffic. And I asked, what is going on? They said there's a special place here. And they started to explain about our Chancellor and all he had achieved here, and what the Lord has done at this place. And I said, I wish it was during the day. I could have attended the service. But then, yesterday, coming here, I also just missed service. So I need to come back. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I say this because I'm one who believes that the ability to lead a nation, like I have been privileged to do, requires wisdom. You need to be educated, yes. You need all the degrees, yes. But you need wisdom as well. And distinguished ladies and gentlemen, wisdom comes from God. Of great interest is to note that the center provides integrated and holistic leadership development programs for leaders, professionals, and youth, cutting across diverse fields and contexts, equipping and training them with leadership, entrepreneurial, social, political, and economic skills for demonstrable impact in leadership and governance. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I've been asked to speak on the theme of this year's conference, which is the challenge of leadership driving Africa's future. The objectives of this conference series resonate very well with my life story. As most of you may be aware, I've spent my entire adult life promoting and supporting women and girls, particularly those in disadvantaged households. This is why I'm excited to be here to speak on today's topic. Furthermore, I have spent the last 2 years as Distinguished Fellow at Woodrow Wilson Center in the United States of America, where I was researching on African women's participation in political leadership. The paper I wrote and the toolkit that I developed as a result of that paper can be found on the Woodrow Wilson Center website. The issues I discussed in that research paper are very relevant to the topic of today. While conducting this research, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I came across this scientific fact that leaders, whether male or female, are born with 30% leadership traits, and society and our environment must add up the remaining 70% in order that they become the leaders they were meant to become. While still in the US, I decided to do more research on this scientific finding. I wanted to make a case, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that if indeed it is true that leaders are born with 30% leadership traits, what are the chances of this African girl child born in a typical rural household, locked up in abject poverty, but brilliant and born a leader with the 30% leadership traits, acquiring the 70% that she requires to become the leader she was meant to be? I therefore approached the Center for Global Development to do more research on this scientific finding. The African girl child research generated a lot of attention and interest, so much so that I was encouraged and funded to write a book titled From Day One, and it can be found on the Center for Global Development website, and it is free. And I'm focusing on the African girl child from the age of 0 to 10. My research has established that indeed leaders are born with 30% leadership traits, and 70% is developed through life, throughout the person's life. Therefore, the challenge we all have is to analyze what happens to our lives to ensure that the best is realized out of the 70%. And more importantly, in Africa, where children face daunting challenges, these challenges have rendered many people unable to realize their leadership potential because the 70% which society must shape and motivate is unavailable. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, the 20th century was a difficult one for Africa. Although independence from colonial rule in the 1950s and 60s brought with it the hope and enthusiasm, this political independence did not necessarily correspond with the economic independence. Too often, Africa failed to harness the talent of the people and the wealth of her countries. However, in the past 2 decades, a significantly different picture of Africa has begun to emerge. In 2010, McKinsey, a renowned management consultant firm, described African countries as lions on the move. McKinsey's view of Africa was validated in 2013 as the World Bank commented that Africa could be on the verge of economic takeoff, much like China and India were 20 years ago. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in addition to political reforms, the combined effects of economic and financial reforms have added to the positive outlook of the continent. Experts predict that the continent's combined consumer spending will grow to about 1.4 trillion United States dollars in 2020. They also estimate that Africa has as many middle-class households as India. The key driver to Africa's success has been its natural wealth, where Africa prides in contributing to about 30% of the world's mineral reserves, including about 40% of the world's gold reserves. The exciting news is that the natural resources wealth explains just a part of the story. What I have observed is that Africa's economy is becoming increasingly diversified in the following key sectors: the financial sector, health and pharmaceuticals, infrastructure, energy, construction, information, and communications technology. I understand that foreign direct investment on the continent increased from 10 billion in 2000 to almost 60 billion in 2009. This can only bear testimony that returns on investment in Africa are among some of the highest in the world. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Africa has decided to change the internal structure of our economy by improving business climate and macroeconomic policies which have spurred the broader domestic economies of many African countries. In Africa, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, 26 out of 32 least developed countries had liberal or relatively liberal regimes governing the repatriation of dividends and capital. Therefore, since 1990, profit levels of foreign companies in Africa had averaged 29%. Since 1991, these levels have exceeded all other regions of the world. More positively, however, a number of African states managed impressive economic growth rates of over 4% since 1990. In addition, infrastructure and technology are moving fast, connecting the African countries to each other and the world at an unprecedented level. There have been more than 316 million mobile phone users in Africa since 2000. Mobile phone usage has increased by 20% a year for the last 5 years, opening up access to banking and other financial services. For example, rural farmers that previously wouldn't have used banks can now access financial products through their mobile phones. In terms of human development, Africa has also made tremendous progress. For example, 10 times more people now have access to AIDS treatment. Maternal mortality and infant mortality rates are dropping across most of Africa. Diseases are being combated. For example, measles deaths in Africa fell by 89% between 2000 and 2007 after a massive vaccination program. These investments in human capital provide the required labor environment that is needed for industry. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, furthermore, during the past decade, we have seen many fora being established in engaging the continent: the European Union Africa Union Forum, the China-Africa Cooperation, the Africa-India Forum, the US-AU relations, and the Corporate Council on Africa. During this 21st century, we have witnessed an increased inflow and competition of the global players in Africa. This clearly shows that Africa stands ready to interact with the rest of the world for its growth. Having said this, I want us not to lose sight of the challenges the continent still faces. These challenges present an opportunity for modernization, trade, and investment on the continent. As you may be aware, here in Africa, most countries are least urbanized, with 60 to 25% of the population living in rural areas and deriving their livelihoods from agriculture. Much of the countryside is deeply rural, in that it is still characterized by poor rural road networks and poor physical, economic, and social infrastructure. Most of our countries in Africa are characterized by the fact the fast urbanization growth rates estimated at around 6% per year. Africa therefore needs innovative strategies and programs to spur economic growth and generate enough jobs for its growing youthful population to address challenges of urbanization, among other things Africa needs. What we need to do is as follows. One, modernize our agriculture sector. This will require the development of rural economy to generate agricultural growth and job creation. I wish to quote a renowned scholar, a product of Africa, the late Professor Callistus Juma, who said, and I quote, "Agriculture and the economy for Africa are one and the same. It is the responsibility of an African president to modernize the economy, and that means essentially starting with the modernization of agriculture. The development of agriculture will require advances in science and technology, commercialization and promotion of regional markets, crop diversification, agricultural processing, and value addition. Engagement of new crop of entrepreneurial leaders dedicated to the continent's agricultural improvement. Africa must improve infrastructure while ensuring food security and sustainable use of natural resources. This will mean introducing policies and institutional changes necessary to promote agricultural innovation by incorporating research, development skills, and capacity from academia, private industry, NGOs, and government in order to develop local knowledge and resources, increase agricultural output, and create markets. Number two, Africa also needs to leverage its people resources. It is projected that Africa will have over 1 billion people in the working age group by 2040. However, there are many school dropouts at primary, tertiary, and university levels who cannot secure employment nor engage in gainful self-employment. The situation creates enormous social pressure on governments and unrest among the youth because they are left idle. There is therefore need for governments to establish and strengthen training in vocational skills, business management, industrial development, and investment, and create loan facilities for the trained youth to create jobs for themselves and also to be able to employ others. Number three, African governments need to focus on education and training of its young people. We should match the skills the young graduates are being trained in and the job requirements. Number four, Africa needs to intensify its efforts in regional integration and intra-Africa trade to enhance and expand trade and investment between and among African countries. Number five, Africa needs equal partnership from foreign investors. We need partnerships that add value rather than extract it. Number six, we need to continue to accelerate transfer of technology as an essential part of achieving Africa's development. Technology will help develop centers of excellence in business, in health, in education, in agri-processing and tourism. Number seven, political will to drive political economic governance. Africa needs political will to create an environment for macro stability. Most governments in Africa today aim at establishing open, competitive, and dynamic economic structures that can mobilize individual initiatives and dynamic private enterprise. This needs to be encouraged. And number eight, Africa will need to expand and grow private investment. Africa needs capital investment for its economic growth and development. This capital must be cheap and long-term, one that is affordable and not exploitative. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, having highlighted the hope and opportunity for Africa, I will allocate more time of my presentation to African women's participation in leadership on the continent of Africa. More than half of the continent's population are women and youth. Therefore, if there has been an impact on modernizing, uplifting Africa, we need to pay attention to women and youth. Many parts of Africa, girls aged 0 to 10 are discriminated against when it comes to accessing education, especially when they are living in poverty. In many cases, they fall victim of harmful cultural practices. Facing these challenges, girls are less likely to develop the 70% traits that I talked about. It is therefore my hope that decision makers will therefore implement policies and build programs that support, protect, and promote the girl child. It is my sincere hope that our African governments will put more focus and investment in educating girls if we have to create a critical mass of women leaders in the future. Women have already held positions of political leadership in the Kingdom of Ethiopia in the past, during the Meroitic period. And one queen, referred to as Candace of Malawi, is said to have prevented Alexander the Great from expanding further south beyond Egypt in his conquests. I deliberately say this so that you can maybe distinguish, ladies and gentlemen, appreciate that we are not asking for something out of the blues. Women of Africa have been leaders before, even before colonization. However, as Africa opened up to trade with outside groups, colonization and warfare changed African social, economic, and political norms with gendered consequences. The intersection of gender and colonization in Africa, particularly how colonization impacted on women's political participation, is understudied. While it is unlikely that patriarchy was an unfamiliar concept in pre-colonial era, the introduction of European systems of governance rapidly institutionalized it into new governance structures in many parts of Africa. After the defeat of local systems of government, the formation of new ones largely failed to acknowledge the critical political and economic role of African women. The impact of colonization on African women varied, though women's pre-colonial political activity was generally disregarded. It was the men, especially opinion leaders, who were consulted by Europeans in the establishment of customary law. As such, women in Africa were institutionally subordinated to men and largely stripped of political and economic autonomy they had previously enjoyed. In the waves of rising demands for independence in African countries after World War II and beyond, female political leaders emerged in the struggles, claiming a portion of their African heritage. We have women like Rose Chiwambo of Malawi, Graça Machel of Mozambique, Winnie Mandela, Bettina Sisulu, Joyce Munjuru of Zimbabwe, and many others who were instrumental in the fight for autonomy from colonial rule and influence in Africa. Indeed, Africa should celebrate the success of her women's political leadership on the continent. As Africans, we can be proud of successes that our women have had, because this history of women being freedom fighters, warriors, and queens, we have been able to achieve great results compared to other parts of the world. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in spite of these successes, many women have failed to realize their full potential, to follow their destiny and calling because of issues of poverty, underdevelopment, underrepresentation, and inequality, among others. As we know, women constitute the majority of this world. And the last time I checked, they also brought the other half into this world. I wish, therefore, to state that despite there being progress for women moving into decision-making positions, as witnessed by the rise of women at all levels of society, including becoming heads of state and government, women still face various challenges on their journeys to public office. Without painting a gloomy picture, allow me to cite some of the challenges that women face, so that together we, men and women of Africa, can concentrate on building a critical mass of both men and women leaders to transform Africa. Women have limited access to formal education. Women lack economic empowerment, as most of our countries don't have affirmative action, therefore have to compete on equal ground with their male counterparts. Therefore, economic empowerment is very key to promote women participation in political leadership. For example, in Malawi, in 1989, I started an organization called the National Association of Business Women. And because of women being economically empowered, 4 of us in that organization ended up in parliament and ended up serving as ministers of women and children, and in my case, all the way to State House. The third one is patriarchal society. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, examples are numerous on the continent and beyond about what women are going through because of patriarchy. But it is not only Africa, Thailand, Australia have stories that we can learn from. Physical abuse. During most of our elections, we are finding that women are being abused. In one country last year, women were actually beaten and stripped naked. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, number 4 is lack of role models. Number 5 is lack of training, fake news, and negative media coverage. Lack of training, people will say, but the international community has been coming to Africa all these years to provide training for women seeking to stand for elected office. But I have always argued that most of the training that we receive is not appropriate. While in my village I cannot go to my chief here and look him in the face and point fingers at him, this training encourages us to be assertive and to do that. It is the best way of losing an election. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, therefore Africa needs their own training designed by African women and men, suitable for African women seeking for elected office. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, women and girls are main victims of extreme poverty in the world today. They make up 70% of people trying to survive on less than $1 a day. They are the first victims when there is an economic crisis. Too many women are unaccounted for, underutilized, and overexploited. But history has shown us that when women contribute more, the economy does better. The IMF research on this subject has shown that eliminating gender gaps in economic participation can lead to big gains in economic per capita. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, however, the tragedy is that if this trend continues, I fear that we will divert from the path that we were on towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular, achieving gender equality. All members of the United Nations agreed and signed this agenda in 2015. It was my hope that in partnership with the developed world, Africa would achieve gender equality by 2030. It is evident that if we ignore women, who constitute more than half of the population, our world's development will be stunted. There's an obvious moral case for investing in women, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as we are members of a society predicated upon the values of equality and justice for all. But we live in the real world, and we want to see returns on our investment. According to research done at the Columbia University, there's a strong correlation between countries with females participating in leadership and a rise in GDP, 6.9% to be precise. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, despite these statistics, evidence has shown that women get the chance to lead. They lead differently from men. This is because women are more risk takers, they feel and connect with the plight of basic livelihood. Women leaders are brave, and when problems arise, they do not cover up or look away. They are more persuasive, assertive, and willing to take risks. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I have always said, I've been asked all over the world, what do you feel about feminism? And I have always said, Africa will have its own type of feminism. We are not going to confront or fight our men. We are going to engage them and work together with them. And in my case, that's how I have achieved gender equality. So as we reflect on challenges of leadership today in driving Africa's future, it is important to reflect what Libe Satan of Yahoo Incorporation had to say. And I quote, "So much what it takes to be a leader has been historically defined by others. And while I was determined to be a leader, the last thing in the world I was going to do was to try to be like a man so that I could be taken seriously. I had to continue to be myself and create a leadership style that worked for me. I'm just not capable of being anyone other than who I am." In my personal case, in the 90s, a journalist from South Africa came to interview me, and she asked, are you working so hard, so aggressively, so that you get to the top and be as powerful as a man? And my response was, no, I'm working so hard so that I can get to the top and be a powerful woman. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we have to be alert that we are not going to copy feminist styles of other continents. A lady in America who unfortunately happens to be Nigerian asked me in a meeting in Washington, D.C., to say, what is it that we are going to do? Those of us that are women that have prospered. I went back home and a woman told me, when I told them, let's stand up, let's fight, let's argue, let's confront this man, it's our time. They said, no, they chickened away. Mrs. Banda, what is your take on this? I said, well, the last time I checked, our feminism in Africa is working better than America. Because in Africa we have had 4 female presidents. And in Africa, the country with the highest number of women in cabinet, in parliament, is on the continent of Africa. And African presidents are doing well in appointing our women into positions of leadership. If we fight with them, that will never happen. So we are winning. So if you want to copy America, go ahead and copy America. But from what I know, America is still trying to get a woman into State House 200 years later after their democracy. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, allow me to conclude by saying that, it's too long. Allow me to say that to make you feel proud of what we have been able to achieve. I recall that when I was head of state in 2013, we were supposed to recruit a new executive director for SADC. Dr. Salamau was retiring. And I asked the executive director and their board to say, do whatever you can to see if you can find a woman for the first time to occupy that position. So they went out and looked for a lady qualified by the name of Dr. Tax of Tanzania. And being chair of SADC, I hosted the SADC summit of that year, 2013. So our statute at SADC says the new executive director shall take oath at a heads of state summit. So with my 16 brothers who are male presidents, supporting me, sitting at the podium, I called upon Dr. Tax to come to the podium, and it requires that she should be sworn in by a Chief Justice. And in Malawi, I had just appointed a female Chief Justice. So Dr. Anastasia Sosa came to the podium. So here was a female president, a new executive director that was female, and a Chief Justice to swear her in who was also female. But the statute also requires that the chair of the African Union shall observe the swearing in. And Madam Kosaza Nazuma was heading the African Union. And my brother sat there watching 4 women conduct matters of our continent. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our brothers have helped us, have supported us. All we need to do is to take advantage of the opportunity we have to increase our numbers. As you may already be aware, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my mission in life has been to support women and youth gain social and political empowerment through business and education. I'm a self-made leader, and I'm privileged to have lived most of the challenges highlighted in this paper. As a result of that, I have pushed these things from a personal experience, from an emotional point of view, and from a practical perspective. I have moved from where I was not so sure myself of my next meal to State House. On this journey, I have continued to say that leadership is about falling in love with the people that you serve and the people falling in love with you. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's a love affair. I truly believe in servant leadership. The grain of leadership in men or women alike will need nurturing to come to full maturity. For many women, their grain of leadership has withered away too early, too soon, as a result of the challenges cited earlier. It is a tragedy that many women have not realized their full leadership potential. It is also important to realize that we can only progress in this campaign if men and women work together. On my journey, as a Malawian woman who is deeply conscious of the history and struggles of Malawian women and girls, as an African woman who knows the challenges, I'm winding up. It's okay. In fact, 5 minutes is all I need. African women and girls, as a global human rights activist, who has championed for the plight of marginalized women and girls and the advancement of women, and as a former head of state who has campaigned for the Malawian people, the African people, and those of the world, I know that we need to take a holistic approach in dealing with issues of women's political leadership. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, allow me to say that what Africa needs are honest, accountable, and inclusive leaders. What Africa needs are leaders that are brave to fight corruption. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we have been told by our distinguished speaker before me that almost $70 billion is leaving Africa. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is leaving Africa to go where? Because it is not going to Africa. Therefore, fighting corruption must be global. The West and Africa must work together hand in hand. We don't want to hear the West calling us corrupt governments of Africa when they are also perpetrators. They are enabling, they are enablers. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I've been a head of state, and I get into America, and I buy 5 houses, and they don't ask me where I got that money from. They are enabling me to steal. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we need to also identify leaders. They are champions right now. There's President Buhari, there's President Kenyatta, there's President Magufuli that have stood up and said, no, stop corruption. What they need is to be encouraged, to be motivated. And the global world, our international partners, must encourage when they identify a leader who is sticking his neck out to fight corruption. I said this because it's not easy. And I said this because I've been there. When you start fighting them, they are strong, they have money, they'll fight you back. They'll smear that back onto you. You need to do several things to be able to win. In my case, if you will Google me, you will think I was the biggest fool. Thief. But what I did, thank God, I conducted a forensic audit funded by the British government. So there's a document online that clears me. So if anybody said, if you arrest me, I'll say you are the one who sent me. I say, yeah, mention my name, but you are going to jail. You are going to jail without fail. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I want to say that the globe, when leaders steal money, they take it overseas. The money that is leaving Africa is going overseas. My request, and I wanted this to go on record, is what when we ask for it to come back, it must come back. We don't have to beg, because it's money that we want to repossess, because it has been stolen from us. I say that, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our boys, there's a contradiction. I want to leave this with you. Our boys are dying crossing the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, looking for greener pastures. But all planes are full of people from the West and East coming into Africa looking for our wealth. Something has gone seriously wrong. Either our priorities are not right, but we want to make sure that we find ways of our boys, young men, staying in Africa, we leaders realizing that the natural resources of our nations are not for our pockets, are for the people that we serve. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as a grandmother, allow me to finish by saying, when there's a bus that is carrying 72 people, and the driver is driving it, and ends up into a ditch, and people die, what we as Africans will do is to ask, what was the driver doing? Was he drunk? Was he dozing? So when my friends blame me, to say, why do you always talk about us as Africans? No, we are sitting on the driver's seat. If the bus ends up into the ditch, we have to answer for it. May God bless you, and may God bless our Chancellor.